Well, thank you for having me. My name's Ken Good. I am an attorney for over 30 years. I specialize in bail law, and I have represented bondsmen across the state of Texas and on their issues. And I also am on the legislative committee for the Professional Bondsmen of Texas. I'm a member of the board of directors, and so we go to the legislature and testify about these issues. And I've written a lot of articles about bail. So everything bail related, I seem to have become knowledgeable about in the last few years.
So you're the man with the credentials. They can't say that no cash bail is good because you have the data to say opposite.
Absolutely. That's true. I think as a result of COVID, that is absolutely money you can put in the bank. We know because we've gotten studies from different parts of the country that conclusively say cashless bail will increase crime.
Yeah, it's good to see that there's studies on this so it can defeat the rhetoric, the idea that, we need this reform and it's going to be helpful. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be helpful.
Well, the ultimate irony is they always start out by saying, when we release more people from jail, that will make us safer. Well, that doesn't pass the smell test. I mean, common sense says if you release more people from jail, crime's going to go up. And that's what we have discovered during COVID.
Right. Yeah. It's and it's all over the news. That's all you see. I want to show people a few headlines I'm going to quickly define what we're discussing tonight. This is the O'Donnell consent decree. This was a federal lawsuit that specifically applies to Harris County in Texas, which is the county of Houston. And as Attorney Good said, this county is different from all the rest of Texas. They have a cashless, is it cashless bail or just a different bail system?
Well, they, for misdemeanor courts only, they do probably 80-90% just personal bonds, which would be cashless bail. We call them simple release when you're talking about all the different release mechanisms across the country. It's an example of simple release where there's no accountability. They don't have to pay anything, so they get out for free. And in Texas, that's called a personal bond.
Personal bond. Okay. I want to show the audience some of the results of these personal bonds across the country. Crime fighting has gotten so bad in some states that a new company has brought in this fog machine that if there's some theft going on, they will use this fog machine and shut down stores. Walmart, actually the first company ever to create a police substation in Walmart. They say it's going to make Walmart look entirely different. And we're really seeing retail stores have to reconfigure their entire operational process to avoid crime. And this just seems like criminal first, innocent, law-abiding citizen last, which is really unfortunate. And then lastly, the last headline I want to get on everyone's radar, cities like Austin are saying, hey, we're short-staffed and there's so much robbery crime. We don't want you to call 911 anymore. Go ahead and call 311 instead. So that's the result of these policies. It's only getting worse. I've heard that it's not as bad as the 80s, but we're heading in that direction fast, it seems.
Absolutely. I would say we're probably worse than the 80s because now how much crime is not even being reported. I mean, if you live in one of our large cities and it's like you just said, theft, they're telling people don't report it. And really the best statistics that we still have to look at for theft are car thefts because the insurance companies require that to be a report with the police to be made before they'll pay off the insurance claim. And so those are the best statistics we have on misdemeanor theft type, property type claims. And those are showing a dramatic increase in those types of claims. And it's not just going to be those, it's going to be across the board because what we're finding in our inner cities is as the rhetoric says, we have to focus on violent crime, we're completely giving up on misdemeanor crime and theft and property crime. And that's what's caused record shoplifting. That's what causes no accountability. That's what is causing in California and in Houston where misdemeanor cases has an 80% failure to appear rate. So nobody's coming to court. And that causes chaos. That causes the courts to dismiss 90% of the cases because they can't get anybody to come to court.
Wow. Yeah. I imagine if you have a finite police force and you have 80% of defendants who refuse to show up, how do you have the manpower to charge them? So that is that a strategy for criminals that are saying, okay, if everybody stays home from court, they'll just dismiss the charge and I can commit the crime again and nothing will happen?
I don't think it's the strategy. I think it's the result, because you find out there's no accountability. So if you miss court, they're not going to do anything to you. And as more and more people realize, hey, Johnny didn't come to court. Why am I coming? And so next time you don't go. And so they don't do anything to you. And so it's something that just keeps growing because, the jails are full. The jails are full of very violent people right now. So there's no room in the end to hold property crime criminals accountable when they fail to appear. And so that creates chaos. The only way you can prevent your criminal justice system from collapsing in that situation is dismissing the cases. And, sadly, that's where we are. That's why I'm kind of optimistic. This can't continue. Like the examples you've given about Walmart opening up a police station within the Walmart. That means they're trying something new because they cannot continue what they're doing.
Yeah. And even in Chicago, I think the one remaining Walmart that was close to the city population has decided to close, and they're literally, a food desert is being created. It is unsustainable. And I think the people that vote for these policies, I know that Houston and Harris County is unique, but in places where it's voted for, I think there's going to be a change in mind. Either they're going to leave or it's going to keep getting worse. Hopefully there'll be a change in mind at least.
Well, I think we go through cycles. I think we're repeating the cycle that we went through in the 60s where we felt safe. So we were more forgiving in our criminal laws, which would cause more criminals to be released from jail, which caused crime to increase. And then we had this backlash, and it was a slow backlash in the 60s. And then in the 80s, we got Reagan, strong on crime. And even Clinton had a big crime bill. So, it seems like we're repeating the same mistakes that we had before, but to a much more severe degree because of the internet and also because of the involvement of, these billionaires who have all these think tanks, and they're all saying, oh, yeah, release more people. It'll make us more safe. No, it won't. It's not. It has not. And then when you have the LA DA's office say that, we just have a difference of opinion over who the real victim is. It's not the person who had the crime committed on them. It's the defendant. That's who the real victim is. No. That's not sustainable.
It is not. It feels like an intention, at least feels like an intentional destruction of civil order and like a Marxist idea that criminals are now higher on the hierarchy than law-abiding citizens. I mean, I know presumed innocent until proven guilty, but when people are committing these crimes on video and they're out a week later, it's just wild.
I mean, innocent until proven guilty is at trial. That's not on releasing you from jail. Releasing you from jail is what assurances are you going to give that you're going to come back. And once you break your promise and you don't come back, well, then you've got additional problems. If you want to hold somebody accountable when they fail to show up for court, you can do that. The judges can. They're just not. Partly because their jails are already full. And you could give you don't have to give an evil intent to these people. You could just say that some of our friends on the other side have boxed themselves into a corner because they've convinced their supporters every 4 years, they've come out with some type of protest saying you're being mistreated by the criminal justice system. You need to get mad about it and you need to come out and vote in larger numbers. And then they do. And then the election passes and nothing changes. So over time, they started electing the true believers who drank the Kool-Aid and are fine with destroying the system from within. And so now I think the mayors are really starting to come up. They're the ones stepping out right now that I'm seeing that are saying, we've got to stop this. The NAACP in Oakland, California issued a letter saying we need a state of emergency on crime because this is unsustainable. And they were blasting their elected officials. The News Nation did a town hall with mayors, and there was a mayor there saying, look, until you have an alternative to the private industry bail system that will hold people accountable and have the same appearance rate, you don't have an alternative. And that's really what we're seeing across the country. They're trying alternatives that are not truly alternatives because they have a much higher failure to appear rate. As we're seeing, it becomes 80% when you can't do anything about it. And so what we're finding out is until we don't have an alternative to the private industry, And if you are trying anything else, then you are setting yourself on a course for disaster. And I think the mayors are starting to call, let's stop this because it's not sustainable. We've already said that, but it's going to kill your tax base. Like you said, people are going to be moving away because that's the first people they're going to move away. And then more protests, you cause more property damage. People aren't building back. And so it's just your tax base is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and your revenue is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And you could eventually kill your big cities through bankruptcy. Look at San Francisco has a 30% occupancy rate on its commercial buildings right now.
Wow, it's down that low?
It
wow. Is. 3 in 10 buildings are occupied in commercial.
30% of each building on average.
Okay.
So it still has a 38% occupancy rate. I mean, that's going to cause, if that continues for 5 years, San Francisco will go bankrupt because their businesses will all go bankrupt.
Not to mention the real estate companies that own assets. I mean, at what point did the values deflate? I don't know how home values and commercial real estate cost that much in a place where you're like almost guaranteed to get injured at some point. I know.
Yeah, look at Portland. Yeah. Portland, a business was burned. And so they decided not to rebuild. They decided they wanted to get out. So they wanted to sell their property. But because of all the chaos that's going on in Portland right now, I mean, they ended up having to sell it probably for 50% of what the value was before all this, because nobody would buy it at the value they thought it should sell for, or what it should have sold for just a couple of years before. I mean, you're killing people's futures. You're killing their retirements. You're killing individuals in the name of, well, the real victim is really, the criminal, not the victim.
Yeah. And as you mentioned with 2020, the pandemic and the lockdowns, I think that exasperated people's mental health issues and it increased crime. And there's a possibility of, I don't know if it's a real possibility. I've at least heard rhetoric of, there are going to be more lockdowns. And then that would just increase crime again, I believe.
Well, I don't know if you can point to the pandemic increasing crime because there was all these lockdowns, you were locked in. But what you can say is during the pandemic, for the really bad people, we tried all of these alternative release mechanisms. And so we saw what bail reform looked like on steroids during the pandemic, and it was ugly. I mean, that's where we found out people just quit showing up for court, and crime is increasing because nobody will hold them accountable. And once your jails are full, how can you do anything with the misdemeanor people? And if you're not willing to, people say, well, we got to concentrate on the really violent stuff. Look, if you don't concentrate on all crime, then people don't see it as crime anymore. And then they get more boldened. And then they start getting bolder and committing more and more reckless crime. You're just doing a breeding ground for future violent crime. I mean, look at this report from Yolo County, and they said they found that people released on just simple release versus people released on a private industry bond had a 200% greater chance of committing a violent crime. And these were people who were supposed to be nonviolent offenders to start with. So the whole basis of the report is we got low-level offenses, but just on the type of release, they have a 200% greater chance of committing a violent offense in the next 18 months.
Wow, that is substantial, twice as likely. Now, is that one of the findings from this report here, or that was a different report?
No, that's a different report. So there's a report from Yolo County, which is in California.
Okay.
A DA who kept his statistics during COVID, and then he got criticized for not having a basis, and so he went back and compared them to people who released on a surety bond, and he released a report on. He released 2 reports on that. What you're looking at is mostly failure to appear rates, and those are people released on simple release. A PR bond has you can see the failure to appear rates are just going through the roof, and I think we have a website showing. If you go to harriscountycourtwatch.com, it shows for the last 2 years the misdemeanor courts have averaged over 80% failure to appear rate.
Harris County Court
Watch.com.
Watch.com. Okay, I'm going to bring that up right now. Let's see. Should load there in just a minute. Yeah, it's it's wild watching. There's that joke that the hardest thing to find in California is a moving truck. And I forgot the exact percentages, but as we mentioned, it is huge, the number of people that are leaving. Oh, I didn't spell that right. It's Court Watch.
So what you're showing is a review of 1 week's dockets for all the misdemeanor courts that was done by the Houston Police Officer Association. And so what you're trying to pull up on harriscountycourtwatch.com, that's the same formulas, but that's applied to, instead of 1 week's dockets for all the misdemeanor courts, it's applied to 2 years worth of dockets for the misdemeanor courts. And so 81.6%, that's the average failure to appear rate for the misdemeanor courts over a 2-year period of time, using the same statistics or the same formulas that the police officers union used for 1 week.
Wow. Would you say that this pattern is similar to other counties that have laws that are close to this?
Yes, I did a podcast with the Yolo County DA, and he just we were talking about his study. I didn't even ask about misdemeanor courts, but it came up, and he was like, "Look, Harris County's not uncommon. I mean, the failure to appear rate in misdemeanor court in the state of California is 80%.
The whole state, 8 out of 10 people don't show up for misdemeanors."
And he said it's the same reason. We can't do anything about it. They won't extradite or they won't arrest misdemeanors anymore in California. And, they said crime under $950, and they're going to prosecute anymore. So, I mean, you almost want to say, well, why do we have our misdemeanor courts? I mean, we could save a ton of money by getting rid of them, but honestly, we need them to do their job.
Yeah.
And the reason why we know all this is collapsing is I went and looked at last August, a year ago, for the month in Harris County, because they print a report of their dispositions in misdemeanor court for the month, and over 90% of them were just cases that were dismissed. So they're keeping their system from collapsing by dismissing everything.
So the 20 or less than 20% that do appear, are they, since there's fewer of them, are they more closely examined under a microscope, or is it just normal business for them?
Well, I think those are the ones that the cases are getting dismissed, because if you don't show up for court, your case is getting put on hold. You can't go forward on a criminal case unless the defendant is before you. Well, I mean, so the dismissal, they don't have to be there for that. But I would honestly argue that the 18%, you're going to give them a reward for coming to court. And so you're going to be more excited about dismissing their cases. I mean, when you're dismissing here's the problem. Think of the court system as a conveyor belt. On average, in Harris County, they're adding the same number of cases to the conveyor belt every week, every month, because it's on average, it's the same. Well, you've got to resolve that same number of cases, or you get a bigger and bigger backlog. And so, when no one shows up and that case gets put on hold, your backlog gets, your shoulders are full of cases. And the only way you can keep that backlog from just overwhelming you and taking out the system is by dismissing cases, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah. It seems like it's happening everywhere, and this is a interesting comment. You can't make a non-victim policy into a crime. I think what they mean is if you try to make it where you reverse the roles of the victims, that will fail in a criminal policy.
Well, what you hear people say, when they started this, they're like, it's just a property crime. I mean, it's just property. It's insured. What's the big deal? Well, I think we've learned in the last 2 years what the big deal is. What the big deal is, if we're going to have businesses that have to sustain $25,000 a day in shoplifting, they will close. And that's going to have a humongous impact on the retirees that live in that community, because they're no longer going to have a place to go pick up their medications. They're not going to have a place to go shop. They're going to have to go 30 minutes, an hour out of their way. Who knows how they're going to get there just to get their necessities. And it's because of property crime where we're saying, oh, there's really no victim there. No, there's always a victim.
Yeah. It's so what do you think is the prescription for this? Like specifically in Harris County, what has to happen? Does that have to get appealed to a higher court? Well,
the interesting thing on Harris County is the O'Donnell case is what started it. And since then, there's been a case called Dave's, went to the Fifth Circuit, and they completely reversed O'Donnell. And they went even further and said O'Donnell should have never been filed in federal court. And so, I'm waiting for somebody to have the guts to go into the federal court and say, Judge Rosenthal, you should vacate this judgment that you entered because the courts reversed you and they said it should have never been filed. So that means you never had jurisdiction to enter this order. The problem is it was a brother-in-law deal to begin with, so nobody at the county wants to go in and ask them to undo it. And if you think about it, they could be slitting their own throat if they do, because their whole argument for why we should do the settlement is, we spent $8 million in attorney's fees, so we got to settle. Well, since the settlement, they've spent over $100 million implementing the settlement. So if they admit that the settlement was wrong, then they're admitting that they threw away $92 million, really $100 million.
A lot of money, yeah. So this other case you referenced, the Harris County case is in Fifth Circuit as well. They're both in the same circuit.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the way that started is O'Donnell was just misdemeanor courts, and Dave's, since they won O'Donnell, they went to Dallas County and filed the Dave's case, trying to extend the ruling on misdemeanor courts to felony courts. And the trial court did that, but it went up to the Fifth Circuit, and the Fifth Circuit reversed as to the felony judges, and we're not going to extend it. And then they said, well, we might reconsider the original ruling. So they filed a motion for en banc, which means that's the way you reconsider something that they've already decided. And when they did that, they reversed it, said we were wrong. Judge Rosenthal was wrong, and it should have never been filed in federal court.
So what happens now is this judge, it's just on the judge to admit they're wrong, and they're probably not, because it's
well, the problem is who has standing to go in there and say, vacate this? The parties do, but the plaintiffs aren't going to do it. The county, or is the county going to admit that they threw away $100 million? Not willingly. There's been some new judges that have been elected, so maybe one of them might have the courage to do so, but I don't know, not yet. I know that the Dave's case is not that old, and it's currently pending at the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, there should be a ruling on the petition for cert in the next 60 days. So I think after that, if that's denied, then I think you're going to have someone pushing to do that. But I would even say if they grant cert, I don't think that's a good news for the plaintiff's attorneys, because I think what the Fifth Circuit has done is they've said we don't want oversight on criminal court cases anymore in the Fifth Circuit. So I think if the Supreme Court accepts it, I think they very likely would adopt that same rule for the United States and get rid of all this litigation nationwide.
That's interesting. What the result of that would be: follow by the books, don't challenge.
Don't weaponize a federal court to impose silly left-wing bail reform measures that you can't pass to the legislature because they're stupid.
Hey, it's about time for that. So in other states, what do you think is the prescription? It seems like I heard Dan Bongino say the people that are elected, the prosecutors, the district attorneys, that they just can't change their minds, that this idea is the idea for utopia, is forgive people and then they'll have a change of character. And Bongino made the point, no, they're not going to change. You just got to walk away. Do you think it has to be before they'll get it through their heads that their whole state vacates, or is there some other prescription for the good people that are in a bad community? What can they do, if anything? Maybe nothing.
Well, okay. So here's the problem. Here's the fallacy that we're really not hearing is, 50% of murder victims in the United States are young black males. And it's the young black males that are committing the murder. And we have DAs in our large urban cities that have decided that the black male murderer should get precedence over the black male victim.
Yeah.
So what we're not hearing is, as crime goes up, it's hurting these same racial groups that they're saying that they need to help, and they're also hurting them in larger percentages. And so I think that can't continue either. And you're starting to see mayors in our urban cities start to stand up for them and say, we don't feel safe, And so the problem is the DAs in our urban cities have put themselves in a box, and it's been paid for by Soros in some cases. So they can't. How can they admit they were wrong? How can they admit they were doing it wrong for 2 years without slitting their throat politically and also getting another Soros-funded person to run against them? So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But at some point, this can't continue. So we will have a change, either willingly or through an elected new official.
Yeah, I think Soros, his money should be banned in the United States. He's banned in a lot of different countries, but I think about the cultural assault on family and that it's particularly hit the Black community, and it's just driving the crime. Like our culture.
Well, look at our urban cities. Families have failed, our minority groups. Schools have failed, our minority groups. Drugs are rampant in the inner cities. So, drug prevention has failed our minority groups. Jobs, there's no job opportunities in our urban cities, or they're going down. So there's fewer job opportunities. When you have buildings being burned and they don't come back, that's even less. But for some reason, these same politicians that have done all these failures are saying, well, we can fix this in criminal justice reform. I mean, really what they're saying is we're giving up on the last chance these people have to become productive citizens. We're just giving up on that through criminal justice reform.
Yeah, because they go on to be repeat offenders, as you said. I've seen several high-profile cases where they go on to reveal this guy's been arrested 7 times in the past year, like maybe a murder in the subway or an assault or something. And it's
our friends on the other side like to say, well, you can't deny bail in an amount that the person can't afford. And that's what they use. And really that ties the hands of judges. They can't address career criminals, gangs, or organized crime. And what they fail to realize, because that's contrary to what the courts have ruled, if they set bail in an amount you cannot afford, but it's because you have a criminal history, you're not in jail because you're poor. You're in jail because you have a criminal history. And their response now is, well, minorities have more criminal histories than people. Well, some minorities commit crime in higher percentages than the rest of the country. And that's something that we just can't talk about.
Yeah. So maybe the only solution is reestablishing a culture of family. I think with the insanity of the far left politics over the past decade, at least there's a substantial shift, I believe, in terms of culture. And it might just be taking this time when there's a vacuum of good, productive culture to rebuild culture, love of family, love of country.
But that's not our history. You have to look at our history to see what we've done in the past, to see probably what we're going to do in the future. And if you look at our past in the 60s, there's a backlash on crime. And so there'll be a strong law and order candidate. And so you'll see more people put in jail, and that will have a positive impact on crime. You put more criminals in jail, you're going to have fewer crimes. So if you look at our history, I agree with what you said. We should reconnect with the sense of family. That would help us the most. But the likelihood of that, we don't have any system in place to do that. What we have a system in place for is putting more people in jail. And that's the most likely result that we will see.
That's true. The Occam's razor, the simplest solution, is the most likely the most effective or the correct way. Yeah, the rebuilding culture is not as tangible, but I think about Hollywood. I think about the impact it's had. Now it's failing. And with AI putting actors and writers out of business, maybe more good culture can be created. I don't think that's the most effective thing in the short term, obviously, but
we all could be better people if we just had a moral compass.
Right.
I tell raising children, it's so hard, because, when something goes wrong and you have an accident, your first impulse is to run. I mean, that's natural. You want to run away from a fire. And so one of your responsibilities as a parent, so if we had more parents intact where we could support each other, we would have more people saying, you have to fight the impulse to run when you make a mistake, because that will only make it worse. And we don't have enough families doing that. And we don't have a system in place to encourage that.
That's true. That's absolutely true. This is a interesting comment. Education in the cities under Democrat oversight is responsible for the crime. The illiteracy rate is what they all have in common. I do know that after the lockdowns, there was a standardized test. I think it's for 5th and 10th graders. And ever since they've started recording, I believe since the 70s, our proficiency, those students in math and reading, is lowest that it's ever been. Is there a correlation between education and
that is one correlation, but I talked to the sheriff of in Tarrant County, which is Fort Worth, and he told me that 80% of the people in his jail share three things. The first one is there's no father in their life. Number two, they don't have a high school education. And number three, they have some outside influence, whether it be drugs or alcohol or gangs. There's some outside influence. So I think that commenter is mentioning is one of those three, but it's only one of those three.
Bad outside influence, no father, poor education. Yeah, that's where we are. So we'll close out. What would you say, voting wise, you think people should just be mindful of that issue? Would that be your prescription of if someone's in a bad area? And again, there may not be a solution, but it sounds like that's going to naturally occur anyways.
Well, 2 years ago, 2 weeks before the election, one party came out and said, crime is a made up issue. Crime is not increasing. This is just a talking point. And within the last month, when the NAACP in Oakland issued a letter saying we need to have a moratorium, we need to have a state of emergency on crime, that's the first time where that party was fighting amongst themselves, saying that crime was increasing. And so I think it's going to be hard for one of our two national parties to claim that crime is a non-issue. But I will say the DA in that county came back and said, oh, it's so sad to see the NAACP, such a great institution of the left, to use right-wing talking points. And then the regional NAACP came out and said, no, they're right. Crime is epidemic and we need to have a state of emergency on it. So I think it's going to be difficult. And you're seeing mayors come out now, Democrat mayors come out now saying, crime is running amok. Our citizens don't feel safe. Where it's difficult is when we get to the suburbs, because the suburbs, I don't think crime is a problem there. And so you start thinking, well, maybe crime isn't an issue when you get to the suburbs, especially if you are a Democrat in the suburbs. So I think crime is going to be a big issue. And I think it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue until it starts going down. And it's not anywhere close right now.
Yeah, you're right. It's it might just be a long time until there's more suffering in that way.
Well, look at New York. New York has rolled back their bail reform 3 or 4 times. But you could argue that each rollback was just a facelift to make it appear like they were doing something, and they really weren't. And so if crime continues to increase, it will become very evident that they were just doing lip service to try to save their butts in the next election, and they'll be gone.
Yeah, it seems there's some parallels between that and illegal immigration, where people are revolting in Chicago. People are peacefully, they're peacefully protesting for the most part, but they're figuratively revolting against this idea that non-citizens are getting more resources than they are as citizens, so they have to live in it. When it was in Texas, it was far away. It was abstract.
But the policy is pretty close, because it's a policy to create chaos. In the criminal justice system, it creates chaos. In the immigration policy, it creates chaos. And I think whether they're intended or not, that's the result in both areas.
Yeah, I don't know the DAs that promote those policies by heart, but I would say Soros hates America, and his goal is to tear it down to rebuild it with something else, but that's a whole different discussion.
I don't know. I've never met the man. I don't have a good idea of what his thinking process is. I think he could be just one of those true believers that's misguided, but he could also be wanting to create chaos, and that could be his goal, and he's gotten it. I just don't know. Someone told me one time, don't give somebody an evil intent when stupidity is enough to explain their actions.
That's true. It's all inference until you know for sure. But I think he's been quoted as saying he hates America. I'm not certain, though. I'd have to fact check myself on that. Well, it's great talking to you, Mr. Good. How can people find you if they want to know more information about what's happening in Texas, in Harris County, and in your neck of the woods? Or they just want to know in general?
Sure. If people want to know more information about bail reform in general, or specifically in Texas, they can go to our website, pbtx.com. We have a blog on there. We have our own podcast. There's a link on our menu, but you can also go to the bailpost.com. We're ranked one of the top 10 criminal justice podcasts right now. So we talk all things bail, all things criminal justice, what works, what doesn't work. We talk about, you want to know what the New Jersey plan is? We have an episode on just explaining what the New Jersey plan is. So we try to be a resource to educate people on different issues, and also to talk about what's going on when an important case gets released. We usually do a podcast about it or an article. I write lots of articles that are published across the country. And we're just trying to keep people informed on the bad things about bail. Because, when you have a think tank, supposed to be a right-wing think tank that's agreeing with a left-wing think tank, and all of a sudden you realize, wait a minute, they're both being funded by the same people. Well, that explains why they're coming to the same conclusion, because they should not be coming to the same conclusion, especially like in California when they're decriminalizing theft under $950, and both sides of the debate think that's a great idea. Okay, there's a problem. And we do stuff like that. We highlight those issues.
That's great. It's bailpost.com.
Thebailpost.com.
Thebailpost.com. Check that out, everyone, if you want to know the latest on what Mr. Good and Americans who want to stop crime are doing and what they're advocating for. Mr. Good, it's great having you on. We appreciate your work and bringing to light how this isn't working. We're thankful for that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Who would have ever dreamed I would be, a voice for these types of issues? They're so complex. But I went to a hearing in the O'Donnell case, and I realized if we don't become experts on this, no one is, because the judge was just quoting gobbledygook from the judge's stand, and I was like, we've got to become experts on this ourselves.
You felt the calling, and you stepped up. I will close this out. Hey, everybody, thanks for stopping by watching this episode of Red Pill News. If you enjoyed this, hit the thumbs up, share this with your friends, comment, let us know what you think, subscribe and follow. Check out thebailpost.com to hear more from Mr. Good about what's taking place to stop this crime across our country. I will be back with some more videos soon. God bless.